Hello and welcome to another edition of the Talking City podcast with myself, Alex James, and Manchester City writer Tyrone Marshall. Tyrone, are you well?
I'm fantastic, Alex. Yes, I've got no broken bones or fractures, so I'm doing good. I believe you're not quite as not quite in the same shape. There we go. For anyone watching on YouTube,
just the one fractured wrist from five-a-side, which was, I guess, my own fault because it was done by a ball while I was in goal, and I went to save it and didn't. So managed to concede a goal and fracture my wrist in one fell swoop, whereas I'm sure if I'd have kept that out of the net properly, I'd be injury-free. But
I would call this karma, to be honest, Alex. Given one of the last times we played five-a-side, you barged me off the ball while I had both feet in the air and put me on my shoulder, and I ended up in A&E. So, you're going to get no sympathy from me. It's fair to say this is karma. Definitely, you've had this coming for a long time.
I was going to say that was a long time ago, so it's good to see that you've held that grudge well.
Yeah, never forgotten, mate. Never forgotten.
Shall we move on?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, listeners are probably
for 20 minutes.
I've got more to say on it, but I'll say it finally.
Yeah, I don't think we can say until it's been resolved in court, can we? So
no, that's it. I think that court case is due
medical
soon.
tribunals. Yeah. Right, let's talk rather than our football failings. Let's talk Manchester City and another new signing. And this is one you've been across, Ty, over the last 24, 48 hours or so. So just sort of fill us in a bit on what's happened and with Sverre Nypan. Are we going with that for pronunciation or?
I don't know. I mean, I know what's happened. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I can tell you everything else. I've been calling him Sverre, but maybe it's Sverre Nypan. Definitely Nypan. I've got one of the two. So announced, deal done last night. I mean, the deal was pretty much done 5 or 6 weeks ago. I think it was before the Club World Cup that we reported the scope of this deal, and then nothing really happened with it. And there was a little bit of concern among City fans that maybe it was something had gone wrong. There was a story in Bild last week that Dortmund was still sniffing around, but the deal was agreed. The deal that was agreed back in June is the deal that City have pulled off. It's not changed. 12.5 million euros, straight fee, no add-ons, no sell-on clause. So in this day and age of transfers, a very clean deal, not one where you're having to work out what the actual fee is going to be, what the sell-on's going to be. Very straightforward deal. 18-year-old midfielder, 70 games for Rosenborg already, 11 goals and 14 assists, I think. Very highly rated. I've seen him play, but I can't remember him, to be honest. He played against Manchester United in the pre-season friendly last summer. And I did that game for the MEN. I can't recall him, to be honest. So great insight there. But yeah, I think
he's that day, but
didn't catch my eye that day. But a very highly rated player, a real technical player. He's expected to go out on loan. Told there's no deal agreed at the moment in terms of where he'll go. So it's not a formality that he'll necessarily go to Girona or something like that. And if he's still in the building by July the 28th, he will train with the first team when they return to pre-season training. So kind of being considered a first team signing at the moment, with the expectation that he'll go out on loan and get some more first team experience. But 70 games at 18, it's fair to say he already has plenty of first team experience as well.
Yeah, I think he made his debut. Was it 15? He made his debut
for
Rosenborg, which obviously takes some doing, and it's a big fee for an 18-year-old who's unproven outside of Norway. But this is a talent that everybody's kind of been interested in. He's been linked prior to joining City. He'd been linked with most of the leading clubs across Europe, hadn't he? So he's obviously got plenty about him, and it's another example, similar to Claudio Echeverri, I guess, of City exploring or identifying European, South American top talent and making a move and securing deals at what are, I would say, relatively reasonable fees, considering how City have been able to generate, and we'll come on to sort of Perone in a minute, but considering how City have been able to generate fees for players who haven't had a great first team impact, it feels like a I guess, a no-brainer or certainly a calculated risk.
Yeah, I think it feels like a pretty sensible deal, really. It's a bit of a funny one in that he was at a game at the Etihad earlier in 2025, I think it was, and City were asked about it and said, "Who? No, not one for us. It's the Norwegian connection, I think." And now, obviously, they are signing him. And I think at the time he was being linked with Girona. So obviously, you can get all a bit murky with kind of the CFG and who's doing what, but he is a Manchester City signing, and like you say, there was a lot of competition for him. He's played a lot of first team football. This is Norway's golden generation, isn't it? Even though they haven't actually qualified for a major tournament, it looks like a golden generation when you look at Odegaard and Haaland, and obviously City have got Oscar Bob as well. There's clearly something in the water in Norway in terms of developing players. Like you say, Nypan was playing first team football at 15 and has got all this experience by 18. It does feel like one of those deals that you can't really go wrong from. Like, it's hard to see how City don't, at the very least, break even on it. You'd expect them to, either he makes it into the first team and he's a good signing and he's here for years to come, or he has a loan somewhere and maybe plays a few games for City and doesn't quite make it. Either way, it's like you say, it's hard to see how they kind of lose out on this one.
Yeah, I remember that. I think he was in Haaland's box for that game earlier in. I'm not sure if they perhaps share an agent. As you say, they're both Norwegian. Not that means they're going to know each other.
But all mates in Norway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but yeah, it's similar to Echeverri. It's another kind of top young talent in the building, and the fact that City are looking at these sort of 18. I think Echeverri's 18 as well now, isn't he? So bodes well for the kind of, I guess, the shaping of the squad going forward, because we've seen a lot of academy players for City. A couple come through, but most of them have gone on and made their mark elsewhere. And there probably is a little gap this year, I would say, with who's the kind of next cab off the under 21, under 18 ranks. There isn't, maybe after Nico O'Reilly, there isn't perhaps a standout performer in that academy group. But if you can supplement it with the best in the business from elsewhere, then you're onto a winner, aren't you?
Yeah, you are. And, it's something City have always been good at. We talk about the academy making money. They've been good at signing young players from elsewhere as well. You mentioned Echeverri. You mentioned Peroni before. Peroni has completed his move to Como this morning.
Yeah.
That's, I think City signed Peroni for 8 million in January 2023. So he's been here 2.5 years. He's gone for 13 million euros, potentially rising to 15. When you throw in the wages, they're probably breaking even on that deal. But there is a 30% sell-on clause. There's a buyback option. He's going to an ambitious Serie A club where he played. When he was fit last year, he played in Serie A for Como. So there's every chance that sell-on will yield something in the future. And it almost feels like one out, one in with Nypan and Peroni. The books are balanced with pretty similar transfer fees. And yeah, I mean, maybe there is a gap there. It kind of shows how hard it is to make it at City, that their highest first team sale this year, I think, is probably going to end up being McAtee. When I wrote a piece earlier in the week, I think it was, about him and Grealish. And when you look at it on paper, I mean, McAtee's a very promising player. Grealish has done obviously way more in his career, but clubs just don't want to spend money on players older than 26 or 27 these days. And Grealish is 29, coming off the back of a really difficult season. And I think City are going to find it hard to sell him. I think might end up even being a loan deal. I think a loan deal is probably looking most likely. So McAtee is probably going to be their biggest sale. And even he looks an excellent player. Last year, we started 3 Premier League games in a really difficult season. So it shows kind of how hard it is to make it. We've spoken a lot about the homegrown player rules. And, I've mentioned a few times the number of homegrown players that have left this summer. McAtee's going to go. Walker's gone. Grealish and Phillips are going to go. They do kind of need more young English players coming through, or to sign them, which is why Gibbs White probably made a lot of sense. But it shows why you kind of need players like this. City, Nico O'Reilly was kind of linked with a move earlier this week, and City are absolutely adamant that they don't expect him to go anywhere this summer. And Guardiola's really happy with his development. He might not play as often as last year because they've signed a left back now, but he can still cover right Nori. He can get a chance to get games in midfield. So there are options there. And, signing Nypan at 18, I think will mean that he does become homegrown qualified in terms of being club trained as well. And I think you've got to spend 3 years before you turn 21 to basically signed by 18, I think, to be homegrown. So he will tick that box as well.
Yeah, and I think clubs now are 100% agree with you there that they are signing more on. I want to say more on potential, even though McAtee, for example, everyone kind of knows what he can do. He's just helped England in the Euros, hasn't he? So you sign in a player who everybody can see is going to be probably going to have a good, solid Premier League career or top level career if he goes to the Bundesliga or wherever. And it's perception as well a lot of the time, isn't it? A young English player come through at Manchester City. I think we spoke about that the other day on a pod. Whereas Grealish, the perception is, he cost 100 million. He's had, arguably, you could argue he's probably had 2 or 3 poor seasons out of 4 at City, or certainly maybe not poor, but not hitting his potential. He cost 100 million. He's 29. And clubs just look at that and think, now we don't want to spend 25 million on that with no resale. Whereas if we spend 25 million on James McAtee coming into the prime years of his career and the possibility of making that money back or making more than that money in the future, you can see why clubs do that. Same with City, isn't it? City wouldn't spend, they walked away from Wirtz and he's at a prime age, and let alone go and spend 20, 30, 40 million on a 29, 30 year old. It just doesn't happen really at these top clubs anymore.
No, it doesn't. And I think part of the reason as well is PSR, and clubs are looking at not just what you buy them for, but whether you can sell them, because not every transfer works. I mean, City's hit rate has been remarkable, and Grealish, I mean, they are in a very unusual situation with Grealish, and that it's a big signing, a big money signing that hasn't worked, and they now can't really find a buyer for. And any club looking at Grealish, if you sign him permanently now at 29, you're probably going to struggle to sell him on. So when you're considering, and obviously City have got loads of PSR headroom, but that's not the case across most of the Premier League. So very few clubs are going to want to pay 30, 40 million for a 29-year-old give him a 3-year contract. If things don't work out, you can't get rid of them. I mean, you only need to look across town to see how hard it is to shift players you don't want. When United have got 5 players coming in at 5 p.m, not allowed to see their teammates to train at night, basically, because they just cannot find a buyer for them. And, I think that's why a lot of clubs are now looking at young players, that you can sign them, even if it doesn't work, the wages are smaller, they're easier to get rid of. Grealish is on about 300 grand a week at City. Even if he leaves permanently and takes a big pay cut, a club's probably going to have to pay him 150 grand a week. And if it goes wrong again, they just aren't going to shift him. And when you're stuck with that kind of wage bill for a player you don't want, it's hugely problematic. So I think PSR is part of the reason why a lot of clubs, certainly the ones that are close to kind of flirting with breaking those rules, are looking at signing young players where they can probably get them off the books easier as well, rather than, it just feels like it's almost impossible now to sell players over the age of 26. I mean, I wrote that piece earlier in the week, and to be honest, I've forgotten the stats, but I was looking at the fees for players, and I think something like the 24, 25 cheapest, most expensive transfers this window are all for players 26 or younger. I think last year, the top 17 deals last summer were all for players 26 or younger. Maybe it makes a little bit of sense, but I think previously it was a lot more the case that teams were buying players 27, 28, 29 who were in their prime. I mean, I'm using United as an example here a lot, and they're a basket case, so it's probably not a good idea. But, they paid all that money for Casemiro 3 years ago to get 1 or 2 good seasons out of him. And I don't think they were entirely alone with that, but I just don't think clubs really risk that anymore. The age profile of these signings that people are paying big money for is dropping and dropping and dropping.
And you mentioned City's hit rate there. The reason that I guess Grealish stands out is because you've probably got Grealish and Calvin Phillips, and that's really it, isn't it? In terms of even in terms of spending 15 million or more on a player that hasn't worked out, you're probably only looking at those two in 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Whereas not to mention United again, but to mention loads of clubs would have a far, far worse hit rate than that. And I think that's why Grealish attracts so much attention as well, is because it is a bit of a one-off that City spent. It's a one-off. They spent 100 million to hit that release. They wouldn't have, if that release clause wasn't there, I don't think they'd have gone to 100 million. They went to that because it was, obviously an easier deal to do.
Yeah.
And it is a bit of a one-off in that sense, whereas over at other clubs, they get their recruitment wrong far more than they get it right. And it doesn't feel like that is the case, or has been the case at City certainly over the sort of the Begiristain era.
Yeah,
and probably is going to be another success story in that.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. I think dating back, you look at the only other one would be Mendy, but obviously that was for off-pitch reasons that failed. Phillips has failed. I think he's 42 million. He's going to be easier to shift because his wages aren't as high. Grealish is the one that stands out. I think there's a view that maybe City's recruitment hasn't been as faultless in recent years, and maybe there's a couple of question marks there. I mean, the one we're probably looking at is Matheus Nunes, who was signed as a midfielder and has now basically been told by Pep, you haven't got the physicality to play in midfield. Is being repurposed as a makeshift right back, and I think he's doing okay as a right back. But if that's where his future lies, I don't look at him and think you'd sell him for 30 or 40 million as a right back. I think there's maybe a couple more questions there, and maybe I think it's too early to say probably, but Nico Gonzalez for 50 million in January. I mean, Pep himself already seems to have doubts about him. He was an unused sub in 3 of the 4 Club World Cup games, kind of an unused sub, I think, in 3 of the last 7 Premier League games. It's still very early days for him, and he could still be an excellent squad player, but there's maybe 1 or 2 questions starting to emerge there where, you start to wonder about it. But generally, like you say, I think their hit rate has been brilliant, and the only ones on pitch that you could say, certainly above the 25 million bracket, that haven't worked are Phillips and Grealish. And Phillips is still going to be easier to shift this summer than Grealish. I think when Phillips is fit, you'll probably find a way out for him, just partly because of the wages thing. The wages are the biggest issue because the Premier League clubs spend way more on wages than anyone else. It's why we're seeing Premier League clubs selling to each other far more often, like the Big Six sell to each other far more often than they used to, because they're the only ones that can afford that salary. And when you have a 300 grand a week salary, even if we're saying Grealish would take 160, 170, there's probably only 10 Premier League clubs that could pay that, and maybe 2 or 3 abroad. So it really does. That's the big risk, the wage packet, because that really does limit your options. Like I say, there's maybe a dozen clubs in the world that could afford Jack Grealish.
Yeah, and the thing with, I think Phillips is 29 as well, actually. So it's interesting because there's obviously Grealish is 29, Phillips is 29. Phillips kind of had that year where he was the next thing for England, wasn't he, in the middle of that midfield, and then it's all gone to pot. And yet we're sort of thinking, Phillips will go and find somewhere more straightforwardly than Grealish. Ironically, in a way. Just going back to Nypan, which might be putting you on the spot a little bit here, but what can City sort of expect from him? I know you said you didn't recall much of him from that game you watched him live in, but I'm hoping you might have done a bit of digging around what kind of player he is, where he sort of might fit in terms of position, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, it's not put me on the spot, actually, because I spoke to Rosenborg's former academy manager not long before we did this podcast. It's almost like we've planned this, isn't it?
There you go. See, that's
absolutely remarkable.
Behind the curtain there of how
absolutely, absolutely. He was, he said his biggest strength, he felt his biggest strength was mentality, but technically was a brilliant footballer. Rosenborg signed him at 14. Said even then there was big European clubs interested in him. Made the point that he felt his family have always had a very clear plan for him, that they've regularly turned down interest with the view to playing games with Rosenborg, developing with Rosenborg, and then moving now at 18. It's a very well thought through career with his family, not just jumping at the first big club or big offer that comes along.
bit
he
like
feels,
Haaland, that isn't it? I guess.
yeah, I think there is probably a big similarity there, and maybe that's something you see with maybe you don't see it as often with British youngsters. I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a generalisation, but there's clearly a thought there that it's not. I think big clubs have been linked with Nypan previously. Big clubs have tried to sign him at 15, 16, 17, and he's kept saying no because he's seen the benefit of playing regular football, even if it's in Norway. It's still it's still a pretty good standard that he's getting that experience at. I think he's played pretty much all across the front line in the midfield for Rosenborg, but is Roar Vikvang, who is the former Rosenborg Academy manager, believes he'll end up as a number 8. And he was kind of predicting that obviously it's going to take time at City. He's got the mentality to go there and thrive, but you're looking at probably 2 years maybe before he is in or around that first team. Like I say, he's going to go on loan this year, but he thinks he's got real potential. And he told a good story about some of the mentality. When he was 14, he played in Rosenborg's UEFA Youth League team, which obviously City fans will know is under 19s.
Yeah.
And they fielded a very young team away at FC Midtjylland in Denmark and lost 10-0. And the players came in afterwards, and obviously there's a bit of consoling going on. And Nypan just said, "That's the level. Then I need to go back. I need to go back and work harder to reach that level." Even though he was only 14. And he said now he's 18. He was probably playing lads who were 18 then. Like, he's miles better now than anyone else who was on that pitch that day. But his thought at 14 wasn't, "I've lost 10-0 or that was embarrassing." It was, "That's the level. I know what I need to do." Like, almost straight away, like, let's go back. I need to train. I need to work harder. And that's what he did. And like we say, at the moment, he's on course to have a much better career than any of the players who were on the winning side in that game, 10-0. And when you're 14 and you're playing 18-year-olds and is a young Rosenborg team, I mean, that's going to make a big difference physically. But, it's clearly a story that has stuck with this academy manager, and he felt kind of summed up his mentality to improve and keep finding ways to improve.
That's exactly why it's all, like, I think we've probably spoken about this before on this podcast, but you can have all the ability in the world, but you need to have that elite mentality as well. And you see it, you see it all over the pitch at City, but you saw that without generalising again and going down Norwegian avenue, but you saw that with Haaland as well. Like, didn't necessarily want to go to wherever, him and his family chose his sort of career path quite carefully, I would say. It strikes me that Nypan has kind of followed suit, and I'm sure having Haaland and Oscar Bob at City as well will help, if nothing else, just with, I know I don't think he's a full international yet, is he, Nypan, for Norway?
No, he's not, no.
Just for having a couple of people from, it's the same as if you went for a job, any job, and you bumped into someone who was from a similar town or a similar place to you, you kind of settle a bit quicker having that familiarity, don't you? So I'm sure that's played a part in it as well. And it'd be really interesting to see where his next move is, because again, City have done well, I would say, out of placing players in the right loans, either to come back better for it or to earn moves elsewhere. So it'd be interesting to see where he goes. I would imagine it'll be a continent on the continent in Europe rather than somewhere else in the Premier League. Did you mention Girona before, or was that just a bit of 2 and 2?
Yeah, that was purely 2 and 2 together. And Girona were one of the clubs that were interested in him, I think back in January. So I wouldn't entirely rule it out. But there's also talk about Echeverri and Girona. I can't imagine Girona are going to want 2 18-year-old midfielders from City. But it is, in a way, it's a big summer for getting loans right for City, because Echeverri is probably going to go on loan. Reece is probably going to go on loan. Nypan's going to go on loan. I think they're 3, they're all 18 or 19, but are very much considered first team players rather than academy players. And they all kind of need a good loan this year to come back ready for the team. I mean, Reece looked good in the Club World Cup. Echeverri only got 45 minutes, obviously because of that injury, but looked pretty good. Came on in the FA Cup final. You feel like they could all make an impact. And I think with Reece and maybe even Echeverri, I think in a different scenario, you'd even keep them around. I think they're going to go on loan because, as we've touched on it, City have got 4 too many foreign players for the Champions League squad. and that list includes Echeverry and Reece. So, you could keep them round and they could get Premier League minutes. I think City have often liked to keep young players who are pretty close to it in-house for a year or two occasionally, just to kind of pick up the training methods. And there's an argument that training with that first team squad every week is as good as spending a year out on loan playing games. We saw it with Foden. Foden never went on loan anywhere, and he learned so much from training. But when you've got such a big squad, it doesn't really work. You can get lost with training. If you throw in Nypan now, Grealish and Phillips still there, I think you'd be looking McAtee. I think that'd be 31 outfield players probably, and that is way too many. You can't do a proper training session with that. So I think that's probably why Echeverry and Reece and Nypan are going to end up going out on loan. But you kind of feel like they need good loans to come back and put themselves in the picture for next season.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting as well from a City perspective and from a City fan perspective, because quite often I think you can kind of get lost with who's gone on loan and where they've gone, and maybe maybe a Perone or I'm trying to think of who else might, like a Wilson Esbrand, those kinds of players who've gone out on loan previously. For whatever reason, these certainly Echeverry and Nypan, partly because of the positions they play and partly because of how much hype, I guess, has been built up around them. But you would probably follow that quite closely as a supporter and be enthused by any kind of, he scored twice today in Serie A or wherever he's ended up going. Echeverry, look at this, he's done really well. And that's because they are first team ready players, I think, rather than academy players of a similar age who've gone out on loan. So it'll be really interesting to see how Echeverry and Nypan in particular, and Reece, but I think centre halves probably attract less headlines than attacking midfielders will do. And I guess it's more difficult just from a statistical point of view, unless you're watching the games, to say, how did Reece get on? Well, they drew 1-1. It's very different. Whereas if they drew 1-1 and Echeverry scored one and one disallowed, then you can kind of see how he played well, even if that masks it a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Perone's probably a good example. I mean, he went on loan last year, but I don't think anyone really thought it was a loan. And obviously he's a little bit older as well, but I don't think anyone thought, that's the loan that could make him. He's going to come back and have a role in the first team. It felt like a loan with a view to a sale, where obviously with these, and they are, they're 3-4 years younger than Perone, so that's probably a big part of it. But with those three, it does feel like it's a loan with a view to slots being open next year. And like I say, it's hard to judge with a centre half, but you look at Stones, Akanji and Aki, and I think all three of those you'd have certainly going into 2026, probably question marks over their futures. They're all kind of at that age bracket now where you'd consider moving a couple on. Gvardiol, I think Diaz and Gvardiol feels like the long-term partnership. I think there's some concern about the pace there. That'd be the only question mark for me. Obviously, Kusanov is there. I think Reece, if 2 or even 3 of Akanji, Aki and Stones have gone by 2026, then suddenly there's a spot in that defence as a squad player, and Reece could fill it. And same in midfield. Gundogan could go this year. Maybe Gonzalez could go this year or next year. I think after what he said in the Club World Cup, we all expect Bernardo to go in 2026. So there's probably going to be spots up for grabs. Kovacic as well. I think he'll stay this year, partly because he's injured, and I thought he had a good season last year, but maybe next year it's the time to move him on. So, I think with all three, like you say, they're probably looking at it and thinking a good loan here puts me in the picture for 2026, 27.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. And that's partly why I think Gonzalez will stay, because I think if you sold Gonzalez now, you might be able to get your money back. But in 12 months, you're probably looking for Gonzalez again, because Kovacic, Gundogan, Bernardo, they've all gone, and you want a 24, 25-year-old, unless Echeverry they're slightly different players, but unless Echeverry and Nypan come back and go straight into it. And I know Reinders is in there now as well, but it still feels like you would need another body if Kovacic, Bernardo and Gundogan all left, and that somebody would look a lot like Nico Gonzalez probably. So it would feel, unless he's desperate to go because he can't see a way through, it would feel a bit odd for me to offload him this summer and then try and find a similar-esque profile of player next summer, where you can keep Gonzalez, and he's only been here 6 months, get him in and around the first team training sessions, keep his progress in-house, as we've sort of touched on with youngsters, and you've got maybe a City second season syndrome where he hits the ground running. I think Sai spoke previously on a podcast about Rodri, and there wasn't this huge fanfare around Rodri in his first season. And look at where Rodri is now. I'm not saying Nico Gonzalez is going to win the Ballon d'Or, but that just shows what time can do.
Yeah, I think there's only two reasons you'd look at selling Gonzalez, and one is the fact that you've got to sell foreign players, and if he's attracting interest, maybe you just say you're going to be the one to go. And the other is if there are any doubts there, and we're kind of guessing really that, like I say, he's disappeared from view. He didn't play in 3 of the 4 Club World Cup games. The game he did play, and he played for 60 minutes, and Pep basically said they weren't very good for 60 minutes. But we see this a lot with City players, that they can disappear kind of from the team and then suddenly they're back, and that could happen with him. But if there are doubts there with Guardiola, maybe it just makes sense. I kind of use the example of Phillips, that if City had one season at City and they'd have said this isn't going to work, they'd have probably got a reasonable fee back for him, because he had injuries in that first season. He was still, I think he was England's International Player of the Year still in that first season. And I think if they'd have said, just got a feeling it's not going to work. Well, I think they knew it wasn't going to work. I think I had seen enough in training then to know it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And then he said, cutting our losses, selling permanently, they'd have probably got a decent chunk of their money back because of his performances for England. Whereas now they're in a different boat. And I think, if they sold Gonzalez now, maybe they'd still get close to that 50 million. If they keep him for a year and Guardiola barely plays him, then maybe his value is going to fall. But I'm with you. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't see any reason to sell him. I think the only possible reason might be that this squad just doesn't, it needs kind of, you need to, I'm sounding very Brexit here, but obviously this is the squad rules that the Premier League and UEFA have put in place, that it feels like you need to sell a couple of foreigners and get a few good old-fashioned English lads in, just to kind of make those numbers fit. And I think we all kind of think maybe Gundogan's going to be the one to go, but Pep loves him, doesn't he? Pep loves Gundo.
Yeah.
If it's between Gundo and Gonzalez, I think age profile, you'd probably say Gundo.
Well, you're not getting much money for Gundogan, are you?
Not getting much money for Gundogan, and you'd get some back for Gonzalez. So maybe they kind of feel their hand is forced there. And like you say, in 12 months, they're looking for someone. Maybe they sign a domestic-based player, and that kind of helps them with squad quotas and things like that.
It's going to be very interesting for the first time in a good while to see this City. I know they've got a pre-season game, but to see the City 11 come opening day of the Premier League, and even the City matchday squad. Obviously, players could move on between now and then, but at the moment I don't think you'd bet your house too much on getting 11 out of 11, or even maybe 9 out of 11 of who's going to start against Wolves, and certainly not in the squad. Who's going to be, who's going to win the race to be on the bench? Where is Oscar Bob going to be involved? Those kinds of players. Who are they going to be? Are they going to be in matchday squads for Premier League games? So time will tell, and it all adds up to an exciting season, which feels a lot closer than it is. Actually, I was just going to say, which can't be too far off now, but it's still a month away.
Still about a month, yeah.
We'll have to get creative on what we discuss for the next 4 weeks on these podcasts.
Yes, definitely. I think we've run out of topics already.
But I think that'll do us for today. And as ever, you can follow every cough and spit from the Etihad across all our channels, online and social media. And thanks very much for watching, and thanks for listening. And we'll see you soon.